I've always liked these old oil lamps or lanterns, so I wanted to see if I could make one out of wood. I started out with a couple of pictures but no dimensions, so I picked a jar, in this case a mason jar or canning jar, and went from there. I'm cutting circles out of cardboard just to get a visual and an idea on dimensions and proportions. So I mark out some what I consider might be appropriate sized circles with a compass just to see how they look in proportion to the jar. I cut out a few different sizes and try them, then I'll cut some out of wood. I'm going to have to make a bunch of different bits and pieces for this, but this is a start. This is all just experimentation at this point as I'm going off pictures, but also some ideas in my head about how I want to attempt to build it. Same as with the cardboard, I just use the compass to mark them out on the wood, and then I'll cut them out on the bandsaw. I used a narrower board for the smaller discs because they'll fit, and I might as well save the wider board for other stuff if I need it. I cut out the sections marked with the circles on the miter saw just to make them easier to swing around on the bandsaw to cut them out. I didn't video the bandsaw part because it's just cutting out a plain circle. Then I need to make this smaller disc hold the jar upside down, so I measured the mouth of the jar and marked that out with a compass to cut out the center. And since that's an inside cut and no way to cut that on the bandsaw, I resort to the jigsaw for that cut. The old Black & Decker came through again, but little did I know this was going to be one of its last cuts. Then the oscillating spindle sander cleans up that cut very nicely. I didn't realize it when I was doing the sanding, but I hadn't tightened the collet enough, and the sanding cylinder started to slip up. Whoops, there she goes. But it got the job done. Then a cleanup of the outside cut is done on the belt and disc sander, and I do that on the base disc as well. Then for the lid that'll be on top of the jar, which is really the bottom as it sits upside down, I cut out a disc with tabs on it, and I'll show you what those are for later. I want this piece to kind of trap the jar in there, so I'm marking out around the bottom of the jar so I can make a sort of a pocket that the bottom will nestle into and be held firmly. That sounded a little weird, but I'm talking about the jar, the bottom of the jar. Anyway, the router with a bullnose or rounded bit is the tool for that job. It's a little dusty and smoky, especially when I plunge in, but I do have the windows and doors open in the shop. It's actually a little warmer on this day, so no coat or hoodie required at least. I get it in the vicinity of the line at first, then venture out closer to it, taking smaller bites so as to better control the router. That's looking pretty close. Give it a little test fit. Not bad, but needs a little adjustment. Give it another test fit, and that should work. Now to put together what I have so far and give it a look. I'm measuring for the uprights that will connect that base to the top part. It's a little bit uneven, and the hole in the donut part there that's holding the jar is just a tad too big. I'm thinking it might still work, but not sure at this point. The base needs a chamfer, so I do that on the router table with as much of a chamfer as I can get out of this bit. That'll look better. Now for another look. Yeah, it's coming along. Then I grab a small piece and mark out for the uprights. I use that washer there to mark those inside radiuses, and I need something a little bigger for the outside ones. I guess this old baby food jar lid should do the trick. Man, that's been kicking around the shop a while. Then with two suitable pieces, I double stick tape them together and take them to the table saw to cut them both along the outside line to get a nice straight cut. Then take them to the bandsaw, which I was actually going to video, but I forgot to turn the camera on. But there they are. A gentle pull separates them without breaking them. I was careful. Then another look. Hey, this thing is looking more like a lantern all the time. But now I have to come up with a way to hook the tops of those to the tabs on that top disc, but still have them removable. I figure I'll narrow up those tabs on the disc to about 1/4 inch thick or so. So I'm just using a little scrap of plywood and marking them to cut over at the bandsaw. Camera seems to be on this time. So I make these cuts to narrow down these tabs on this piece. So then what I want to do is cut slots in the upright supports so those narrower tabs on the upper disc will fit into them. So I'm measuring and figuring out how deep to make them, and also thinking about how I'm going to make them. First though, I needed to shorten up those tabs a bit, so marked them and took them over to the bandsaw to lop those off. I had a router bit the right size to cut those slots, so I thought that might be a good way to do it. That was an indicator right there. Wasn't quite centered, so I made a slight adjustment to the fence. I probably should have taken multiple cuts, shallower, instead of trying to cut the full depth all at once. Let's try this again. Still doesn't really want to cut very well. I'll try it from the back side, maybe that'll be better. Not going all that well that way either. Try it from the front again. Yeah, I guess that's not the way to do that. So let's try the table saw to cut those slots. That is, after I cut out another piece. This seems to be working much better. It'll just take multiple cuts with a few adjustments. And I'm making a cut and then turning the saw off just for safety, as I'm making these cuts to one end of each piece, so I can't run it all the way through, and I don't want to try to move the piece away from the fence or grab it that close to the blade with the saw running. So I wait for the blade to completely stop before I move the piece. After I make the first cut on both pieces, I have to turn it around and then make the other cut. So I make sure I can set it over the blade and it clears, and I kind of plan how I'm going to make these cuts. Then I decide to take a scrap piece the same thickness and do a test cut just to make sure it's going to be the right width. Not the safest way to do this, but I went slow and was careful. It looked good, so now it's time to make the cuts on the actual pieces. Double checking myself and make sure I'm going to make this cut right. There's the first cut. Okay, here we go. Over the blade. It would have been safer to put the push stick on there before I started the saw, but I did keep all my fingers. Cut complete. Good to go. After I did the other one, it's just a matter of moving the blade over a bit at a time, basically one blade width, to nibble away the rest of the material in there, using the same method of stopping the saw after every cut, until I had both pieces fitting, just like that. Then another test fit of the assembly to see what it looks like. Hey, it's kind of looking more and more like a lantern. I still wasn't satisfied with the fit of that jar into the slightly too big hole, though, so I decided to cut another one. And that's when it happened. The old Black & Decker bit the dust. The motor would run, but the blade didn't move. So I did a little investigation just to see. I took it apart to have a look at the innards to see if it would be something easy to repair. And it seems the gear wheel that drives the blade up and down had come loose from the shaft, so it wasn't making contact with the drive gear, as you can kind of see here. I probably could have taken it all the way apart and fixed it, but the motor has been making funny noises for a while now, so I figured it wasn't worth it. Plus, I have another saw anyway that I inherited from my brother. So it's time to part ways with this whole thing. Goodbye, old friend. It's on its way to the landfill. So then I decided the base needs to be thicker to have better proportions, so I trace out around the existing base onto another board and cut it out on the bandsaw, off camera. I taped those two uprights together again to do some sanding on the inside part with the spindle sander. I also did a bunch of sanding on the other parts too, but didn't video that because, well, you know, it's sanding. So I didn't show it, but rest assured, I did it. All the bits and pieces. And speaking of pieces, I needed another piece for the very top, and I wanted to use a hole saw to get a perfectly round disc, but I didn't want the hole from the pilot bit. So I chucked a sizable one up in my drill press with the pilot bit removed. And believe me, the only way to do this is with a drill press with the board clamped down securely. And even then, if you go in too fast, yep, that moved the whole drill press. So try again a little slower. And once you get it started, it'll hold itself centered. But don't ever try this with a handheld drill. After a little dust alleviation, success. I was all ready to have to fight and pry to get the plug out, but one little touch and it fell right out. I'll take that every time. And there it is. I wanted to put a chamfer on that as well, so it's off to the router table. And I always think, this is small, I'll just do it quick and no dust collection. Well, I should know better by now. That's a horrible idea. After a dose of sawdust in the face and some acrid smoke, I take the time to hook up the shop vac. What a noticeable difference. I go slowly and deliberately, taking small bites, as this is a small piece and my fingers are kind of close there. But I didn't really know a good way to hold that piece any other way. If you're uneasy doing this kind of thing, then by all means don't do it. But I got it done and kept all my fingers. So I think I finally got most of the parts and pieces cut for this thing, so let's put it all together and see what it looks like now. Kinda looks like a lantern. Then I do some test fits, a little fine tuning here and there, a little chisel work. a little sanding, a little filing. Start to think this thing might come out okay after all. Time to start putting some of these parts together permanently. I glue the top two discs together first, and I can use a couple of brads here to hold them in place because they're from the bottom and won't be seen. But I still need to make a couple of parts. So at the drill press, I start with a 1/4-inch bit. Oops, forgot to tighten the chuck. My plan is to drill this hole deep enough to glue a dowel into. Then, without moving the workpiece so it stays centered, remove this bit and put in a plug cutting bit to cut around it to make a little knob to go on the end of the dowel to use as a pin to connect the uprights to the top disc holding the jar. Which seems like a good plan, but there's not enough room to get the bit out. And I can't move the table down because then the shorter plug cutter won't reach. So I move as close as I can to the edge and re-drill. That lets me get the drill bit out and then the plug cutter in. And same for the other one. Then after cutting the board down a little, I do use the bandsaw to release these as they're hollow and maybe won't break cleanly if I tried to just break them out. This works well though, and I have two little knobs. Then a little more glue up. I glue the two pieces together to form the thicker base. And after I get it all lined up, shoot a few brads in from the bottom to hold it. After it dries a while, I mark center and drill a hole in the bottom for wires. Ooh, smoky. Somewhat dull bit, and I'm partially drilling into a knot, so the shop vac to the rescue again. Much better. Then a 1/16 bit to drill through to mark center on the other side, and I flip it over to drill a 1-inch hole with a Forstner bit for the actual light fixture. So here's one of the many issues I've encountered on this project. I was going to use another one of those fixtures like I used on that other light project, but that proved problematic because I would have had to sink this down at least that far into this wood so it clears when the jar goes in that thing, it clears that and doesn't sit on it. So I ditched that idea and decided to go with this type of a thing, and that just sticks in the bottom and sticks up vertically like that. But then I got to get the cord out, where this one you can just shove the wires through a hole and then make a connection. I didn't want to make a connection. I wanted it to be wired solid, which this is. It's got this end here and then the plug already on the other end. But then you can't get either one of those bigger ends through a little hole going through here. So the wire is going to come out the bottom, and I got to get it from the bottom out under the lamp base to go to the plug. So I can't just drill a hole in the side. I'm going to have to cut a channel in here, which I guess I could do with a router, but getting it straight would be challenging. So I'll come up with something. So this is what I think I'm going to do. I'm going to drill a channel into the bottom here that I can just lay this wire into. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take a sacrificial block and clamp it against there and then drill down through there. This is just to keep the drill from coming out this way. And then I should be able to drill from out here into the center hole and then just lay that wire in there. Which worked fine, except it wandered a bit, so I had to do it again to make it the same depth all the way through. But it worked. That should work. Now it's time to glue the jar holder donut onto the base, and this is the one I redid, so the hole fits the jar better. I'm just going to line this up and clamp it because I didn't want brad holes showing, and it won't really have any stress on it anyway. Glue should be plenty to hold this. I was going to just use 2 clamps, but then I'd have to lay it on its side, so I added a third so it would sit on the clamp straight. Then if you have 3, you might as well have 4, right? After it dried a while, it was time to do the part I've kind of been dreading. Holding those uprights in place and drilling the holes through them and the lid. I held it together and got one clamp on, but it was kind of pulling them sideways a little so they weren't straight, so I had to put a second one on from the other side to even out the pressure. I had to get them tight enough to hold it securely, but not too tight as to break them. Okay, I think I got it. And they look pretty straight. Time to drill. And this is the part I was dreading. Those parts that I'm drilling through are only 1/4 inch thick, so kind of fragile. Very gently, not too much pressure. Hey, no problem. Stick a dowel in there to hold that one in place and do the second one. And that one immediately broke. But I kept going because I can probably fix that. Easy, easy, very light touch. Don't want to totally ruin this thing in the home stretch. Just a little stressful. I was trying to go as gently as I could, and it still broke the other one. But I'm going to try and just glue it all back together. So a little wood glue. Can't really clamp it either because it's a curved part. So after I got them carefully placed back on there, I just set it down on the bench and put a weight on it. That should work. Look straight. On to the pins. This is a 1/4 inch dowel, and with a little dab of glue applied, just sticks in the little knobs I made. Then mark it for appropriate length. And cut it off with a small handsaw. Same for the second one, and then it's on to the belt sander for a quick round over of the knob. I did a little too much sanding on one and found I had drilled the dowel hole a little too deep, and I sanded right through the knob. Sanded right through there. So I had to make another one of those. Then I got to thinking that heat may be a problem, even with an LED bulb, because it'll be totally enclosed in the jar. So I decided to vent the top by drilling some holes, and the very first hole I tried to drill with a regular twist bit totally walked sideways here. Not a whole lot is going my way on this build. But I keep on keeping on and finish the hole. but I get a brad point bit for the other three, so the brad point will keep it from walking. I'll also drill a hole in the jar, but I don't have any diamond bits for my Dremel, so I'll have to do that later. Now I'll finish putting the top together, just a matter of getting it centered, which is pretty easy because the holes are centered and I can just reach in with my finger and feel if it's lined up. Glue and a couple brads do the trick. Time to get these uprights installed. I kind of hemmed and hawed on this too much, really. I couldn't think of a good way to use any kind of fastener. I could have maybe put a long screw in from the bottom on each one, or maybe shoot one brad in, but I was a little gun shy to trying to do anything like that with those uprights for fear of splitting or breaking them again. So I finally just said, well, the heck with it. I'll just glue them at the bottom and call it good. I applied glue to the bottom and glued them to the base and the donut. Put the pins in at the top to keep them lined up. Got them straight as I could by eye. And clamped it up to dry. Again, using 2 clamps to keep even pressure on them and keep them straight. After that, it was time for some finish. And I'm using the water-based polyurethane on this cedar again. 3 coats in all. This project was a bit of a challenge for sure, and I worked on it over the course of a couple weeks. I actually started it before the sewing ruler rack I did in the last video, but I wanted to get that done because it was a project for a friend. There was a lot of waiting for glue to dry and remaking parts on this one. I even changed the design a little bit midstream. The finish took a couple of days too, as the sanding between coats was a little tedious with all the irregularities, but it's mostly done. Just a couple things to go. First thing is, it still needs a light socket, so this little one with the socket switch and everything pre-wired is the thing. Just slips right in the hole and a little piece of springy steel holds it in. Then I want to secure the wire into the base, and I've seen lamps with a knot tied in the cord to prevent pullout, but I'm not a fan of tying electrical cords in knots, so I'm just going to put it into the channel I cut and use a little 5-minute epoxy to secure it. I give it a little extra slack and just slather some epoxy in there in a couple places, and I'm thinking that'll be good. While that's doing its 5-minute thing, I get some felt to glue onto the bottom of the base with contact cement. That should cushion it and protect whatever I set it on, and also close in the bottom where the wire is. This spray contact cement can be used 2 ways. You can spray it on both surfaces to be glued for an instant bond, or you can spray it on one surface for a repositionable bond, meaning you can move it where you want it, then press it on to make it stick, and it becomes permanent after about 10 minutes or so. And that's what I'm doing. And it says to wait 1 to 3 minutes after spraying to mate the surfaces. Well, the epoxy had time to set up and the contact cement is ready, so here we go. It's sticking, so flip it over and give it a little pressure. Should be good. My X-Acto knife is just the thing for cutting the felt around the base, as long as I don't cut the power cord. Did a little trimming around the edge also, cutting at an angle just to clean up the edge of the felt and make sure nothing was sticking out around the base. That looks good. Still needs a wire handle like the originals had on them, so I found a couple small screw eyes in my stash, and I'm just going to line up by eye and put one on each side. You have to make this face when you're lining these things up too. It's mandatory. Only way it'll work. Even though these things are tiny, I'm still pre-drilling with a 1/16 inch bit just to make sure I don't split one of these uprights. Then the other one. See, same face. If you make one of these, you'll have to rewatch this video so you make sure you get that face right. For the wire handle, I'm just using the polycan to bend a stick of oxyacetylene welding wire around. Didn't work that well though, as that wire is pretty springy. So I kind of had to adjust it some by hand. Then I bend some hooks on the ends to go through the screw eyes, and it's a wire handle, just like the real ones. Then it's time to put this thing together for the last time, finally. Oh wait, needs a light bulb. I started putting it together then, and the pins were tight and didn't quite line up right. I got it together, but the pins were way tighter than they were before. I finally figured out that the jar was turned around backwards from where I had it first. Turned out the lip on that jar that it's sitting on is not square to the bottom. I never would have thought they would have made them like that, but it definitely made a difference which way it was facing. Once I put it together with it turned the right way, it fit nicely and the pin slipped right in. And I think we have a success.
Let there be light! Ta-da!
So a few trials and tribulations on this one, and if I was going to do it over again, I'd make a few changes. First, probably I'd use one piece for the base and eliminate that seam there, or using two pieces, I'd make this one a little bit bigger and then step into the second one and make that seam a feature. Maybe chamfer there and then go up and then that chamfer. So two chamfers and two different diameter discs. The other thing, I would use smaller pins here, like 1/8 inch dowels or even skewers. Something so you're not drilling as big a hole through there. And maybe even make these a little bit wider to give it a little more beef. And probably use a harder wood. This cedar is kind of fragile sometimes. But other than that, I think it came out okay. So I guess that'll do it. I hope this has been illuminating. See ya.